this tutorial. I think we have already touched on basics of handling data insertion, database creation, table creation with PHP, and I thought it was really necessary for us to actually touch this topic, which is prepared statement and bound parameters. We're going to do a most on prepared statement, right? Um, a prepared statement is a feature used to execute the same SQL statement repeatedly with high efficiency. All right. So we have an SQL statement that we want to execute, and it has to be executed over and over, maybe with different data and so on. So we use prepared statement in that case to actually initialize our SQL statement and just be passing in the data. You get to understand that as we move forward. Now we have the prepare, uh, which is an SQL statement template which is created and sent to the database. So it's like when we say prepare, it's like actually having to bundle the SQL statement and send it to the database and try executing it with blank input, right? We actually get to pass in things like question marks as the values instead of passing in the actual values. Now, the database passes and compiles and also performs a query optimization on the SQL statement and stores the result without executing it. Now, like we said, we are just preparing the statement. We are not actually executing it because we have not passed in the data. We just want to make sure that this statement has already been compiled on the database so that when we pass in the data on the later time, it will not need to be compiled again, or it will not need to take more time again when we want to do our compilation. Now, what happens is that compared to executing normal SQL statement directly, prepared statement have three main advantages. One of them has to deal with the time that it will use to perform that query. Imagine that we have to insert data to the database over and over using the insert keyword. Each time we want to insert data, we pass in the insert keyword and so on. This is going to actually take time. It's actually going to eat much time than if we had already prepared the insert statement and just passing the data, right? Now, another advantage is that bound parameters minimize bandwidth to the server as you need to send only the parameters each time and not the whole query, right? This boils back to the fact that we are not sending the whole query to the database each time. What we are doing is we are just passing in but the data because our query had already been prepared. Prepared statements are very useful against SQL injection. Uh, yeah, I mentioned SQL injections before, and I said we're going to talk about it now. SQL injections are some form of insecure way that malicious hackers use to access the database by passing in some characters that are maybe not understood by SQL, and then when these characters are executed in the back end, some havoc may happen, right? So, because parameter values which are transmitted later using a different protocol need not to be correctly escaped, if the original statement template is not derived from the external input, SQL injection cannot occur, right? So, since let's take for example that we had our prepared statement that has to do with insertion only passing things like question marks instead, no values. And then, how do you think these hackers will actually be able to access our data when we just passed in, but maybe blank data? It is later that we've processed the data that we can actually pass the data to the database when it has been fixed, when the data has actually been processed and taken care of by trimming and so on. There are really many ways to avoid SQL injection. Prepare statement is just one of them, and that is the one that is mostly used, right? So it is not much different from executing normal queries, but just like we said, it is more optimized because we don't have to execute the query over and over. We just prepare the query and compile it, and then just be passing in but the data inside it. Let's take for example here on the screen you have a prepared statement. First is an insertion, say insert into students, we pass in the full name and so on, and then look at the values. They are question marks. Then the next thing is we prepare now this statement, the SQL, then we bind the parameters to whatever we are passing in. Now this bind param is a keyword that is used to actually bind in whatever you'll be passing as values to the question marks, right? So you see that you see S here. Yes, this S stands for string. If our data was an integer, it will rather be I, and yeah, you have B for a block, which we'll not talk about now, but most common you have I and S. So you use the bind param and you pass in the actual data that you have been passing. So this data now, after being processed, you can actually pass them now. So after passing those data and binding them, you can now or maybe define the values and insert, right? I am going to open to my editor just to show you something. Okay, so we have our SQL statement here. Um, insert into students this, and then we are passing in undefined parameters, right? Question mark, meaning that we don't yet know them. Then the next thing is what we prepare. Which one stays on? The prepare statement is used to prepare an SQL statement for execution. Now, this you could just copy this query and put it inside here, but sometimes it's usually nice to actually define it like this. Then the bind param is also a function that binds the variables to be prepared to the statements, right? So you have these various parameters, full names, email, gender, country, and date of birth. You are binding these to these question marks here. And what are the types that we are binding? They are strings. That is why you have S, and so on here, right? So if, for example, uh, the gender or the date of birth was an integer, we'll put I instead of S, right? So after binding them, you can now define the data, right? Yeah. So you see that at the beginning, this statement is sent to the database and executed, or it is sent to the database and prepared and compiled. What next? When you define this and you take statement execute, it just goes into your prepared statement and then just fits in the value. So it doesn't need to reload the database over and over again. Okay, so that is what the prepared statements are all about. It is quite a topic that is broad, so you can actually get to do a lot of other research on it, right? Okay, so that is it about prepared statement. So if we happen to execute this, let me see, PHP prepared PHP, you actually see new record created successfully. And if you actually load the database, you'll see the records there. This is for, let's check. So you actually see the feed one, right? Now, note that you could actually pass in multiple data here, right? As many as possible. After executing, you pass in the data again and so on. So you can pass in the data as many times because you had already prepared this statement, right? That's it about prepared statement, and you actually want to use it most of the times when you have to deal with inserting data to the database because you don't want SQL injection, you don't want malicious attacks to actually get to your database. So you make sure that you actually get to prepare your SQL statement before doing the final execution. The next thing we will talk about is the select statement in SQL. This is used to get data from the database, right? So the select statement is used to select data from one or more tables on the database, and this is a syntax. You select the column names from the table names, right? So if you have, for example, from here, please just let me just inform you from here. I'm not going to be running this code again on PHP except where I actually need to run it for you to see. I'm going to run them directly on the database. The same SQL applies, so you just need to put them and execute it. Okay, so I'll run to my database and I'll go to SQL, and here I'm going to actually type my first select statement, select star from students, right? That's the table we have. Star means select all from students. And if I execute this, you actually see what is shown here, a table showing all the rows and columns on the student table. The next thing is that you could actually select uh, things like single columns, two columns, and so on. You must not select everything. For example, I want to just select the ID from the student, and if I run that, you are going to get a table that has just the IDs. You can select just the email. You can select just the email as well as just the full names and so on, right? So let me select the email and execute this. You get all the emails, right? So it is the same thing that you just need to know the SQL statement that you're passing it. Also know that you can select multiple columns like ID, email, and full names from students. And if you run that, you're actually going to get the same thing that you wanted, right? That is what the select statement does. And I'm going to switch to my editor. We had a pre-prepared select here. This one selects everything from the student table on the Zuri PHP database, right? So we get it and we execute it here. Now, this is just a simple while loop. Take note of this other one, that if the number of rows from this result is greater than 0, then we should look through it and print the data, right? Take note of this function, the MySQL num rows, which gets the number of rows in a result. Then also take note of this. While the data is equal to this function too is used to actually convert our result into an associative array, which you can then look through it like normal arrays in PHP, right? So while that we do this and we print out the data. If I actually get to execute this PHP select.php, actually going to see data being printed out. One, two, three, with all the data being passed at once. All right. So that is how you actually issue the select statement. Another one is the where clause, so on, things like select or like to filter data from the database. You wanted to get maybe just where the email is equal to andrew@gmail.com or whatever, right? So you use the where clause to filter record. For example, I'll switch back to this and I'm going to actually open my SQL, and then let me check how the data is. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to just select this and I'll select star from students where email is equal to, then I'll pass in the email. So this is used to actually filter your data, right? If you notice here, we will actually get everything if there is an email that exists like this. So if I run this, it returns two records because there are two people with the same email. Though that is not logical, but it's just we did not make mention of the unique keyword. So you see that only two records are returned here because they have the same email, right? Yes, we use the where clause in filtering. So you could actually, instead of issuing this here, instead of issuing star here, maybe you wanted to log in. So you are going to actually get the email and the password from the front end, and then you are going to select star from maybe the student where the email is the email that you just got. You see, So when you get that now, you can actually get the password and confirm all of those kind of things. That is how you filter data in PHP. You also have the order by clause where you can use to sort data, right? The order by clause is used to sort data, maybe in ascending or descending order. Let's check it out. So I'm going to actually select star from students, order by let's say email, for example, right? And I'm going to execute this. So if you notice here, the emails have been sorted. You see the A, then Z, and so on. If I order by the ID, by default, it's usually being ordered by the ID. You can order by full names, you can order by whatever key you want to use, right? You see, now it has sorted by the name. Okay, so that is how you can actually maybe sort data using SQL. Maybe for example, coming back to this same, I'm going to use this file. Let's say order by, let's see, email, for example. And then take note of what is printed here. Let me clear it. You see, it started with John Doe from Andrew and so on. But if I execute this now, it's going to actually do something else. .php, select .php. Now, look at what happened. It wasn't John Doe again. It started with Messi Amaka because I have ordered by the email. So you actually use the order by clause to sort data, right, in PHP. Now, you also have things like to delete from the database. This is actually useful when you want to delete record from the database, and the syntax is clear. Delete from table name where some column is equal to some value, for example. So I'm actually going to create another file here called delete.php, and I'm just going to actually copy this and paste there. This is not what we are doing. SQL will be delete from students where the ID is equal to 1, for example, right? And this is going to be executed. So if the delete was done, then we say student successfully deleted. Student successfully deleted, right? This is how you use the delete clause. So if I actually get to execute this, php delete.php, what did they say? We have this error on code error line 7, my SQL query. Um, Let me actually get to see this. Sometimes this spaces could actually be a cause to our problem. Start keyword delete from execute this, and you actually see student successfully deleted. So delete from students where ID is equal to 1. So how do you know it is deleted? Let's run our select again. And let's check if there's an ID of 1. There's no ID of 1 anymore. So the record has been deleted. That is what you use delete for. And you also have the update in PHP, which is used to update a record, right? Let me show you that. You have PHP update, right? So you use the update to actually update record in your database. For example, I want to in this tutorial, I think we have already touched on basics of handling data insertion, database creation, table creation with PHP, and I thought it was really necessary for us to actually touch this topic, which is prepared statement and bound parameters. We're going to do a most on prepared statement, right? Um, a prepared statement is a feature used to execute the same SQL statement repeatedly with high efficiency. All right. You did not know the query to actually execute. Now, look at something. I'll come here. You see, insert, delete. If I take update, you actually see uh, this template sent out. And if I actually paste this here, PHP, PHP. Okay, so I could set this to SQL is equal to update this and this. The web ID equal to 2, and then what next? Mm, so update students, right? That's a table. Set ID to this and so on. I don't want this query anymore. I'm going to write mine. So I'm going to update students and it's syntax. So it's not needed. Update student, set full names to maybe um, Nancy, where ID is equal to 2, right? So you use the update, then the table name, then the set keyword is used to actually set the field name that you want to update. Now this query is there, so I'm going to include my connection again, include connect.php, and then I'm going to actually execute the query now. If there is a connection, then sql underscore query, and passing the connection and the SQL statement. So I will actually catch an error here if it was executed. Echo done, else echo and error occurred, right? Just to catch some errors. So we want to update the student's full name to Nancy, where ID is equal to 2. So let's roll back to our database and actually see what is there. Students, the ID 2 is from Andrew. So when running that, I should expect to see Nancy here. So let's roll back to this and try executing this query. PHP update.php, and we see done, right? Now if we come back and okay, it's Andrew. If you refresh, you actually see Nancy, right? That is how you use the update keyword in PHP. So PHP in general can be used to I mean to create let me just create, read, update, and delete the content of the database, right? This is what they call CRUD, right? Main functionality of most web applications, they are all based on the CRUD. And in the whole of this tutorial, we have actually seen how to use the CRUD methods and so on. Okay, so that is how you use the update in PHP. Now, there's one last thing we need to talk about before we maybe end this chapter on databases, though you need to do some other researches. Now, what if we want to get just some certain amount of data from the database? We don't want to query everything, right? That is where we talk about the limit keyword, right? It is used to limit the amount of data you get from the database. Imagine you had a certain 10,000 10,000 entries in the database and I wanted to query just the first 100. Will you need all the 10,000? No. So that is where the limit is used in PHP. So MySQL provides a limit clause that is used to specify the number of records to return, right? So the limit clause makes it easy to code multi-page result pagination with SQL. So if you have heard of this term before, pagination, that is where the limit is used, right? You have a whole chunk of data, but you don't want to display all of them. So you want that the first 10 should be displayed. Then when somebody clicks on next, then the next 10 and so on. That is where you use the limit, right? So this is an example. You have a table called orders. I want to select just the first 15. You use the limit keyword. So select star from orders, then limit, and so, right? That is just the simple uh, syntax for it. And maybe we should actually create a file for that. Limit.php. Right, so let's go to limit.php and just paste this code here. And instead of delete, we'll call it select star from students limit 5. No, they are just 4 entries, so I'm going to limit it to 3, right? And that is simply it, right? You just pass in the limit. Sometimes when writing to differentiate, it's usually nice to use the caps. Right? Yeah, and that is it. So if I actually get to run this here, and since it's a select statement, I want to actually display it. So I'll come and copy this and just paste. Save con paste. Right, so we have that. Now we check if there's a connection and if the number of rows is greater than 0, we should print out the data. So if I run this php limit php, oh, okay, we got an error. Okay, so sorry, so result equals to MySQL underscore query in SQL. Like, this is just it. This record this and put it inside the connection. The reason we're having the error was because we did not actually pass in the result and we're trying to, that was just a copy and paste issue. So if you notice now we have just 3, right? These are the first 3. But initially I'm going to actually run multiple insert here so that let's go to our insert.php, multiple.php, and I'm going to actually add another data. And let's call this yeah, whatever the name. Uh, on let's change the names. Okay. So yeah, let's run this statement. PHP multiple PHP. Set the data and then run back our query. We have this, but if we actually refresh our database, we have more than that amount of data. We have 6, right? So you see that you use a limit keyword to actually, like the name state, limit the amount of data you get from the database. They call it pagination, and you're actually going to see that when we actually advance as we continue with this course. Yes, guys, that is it. I pretty know that I've been kind of, I can say, fast with this particular tutorial because I wanted to make sure we covered everything, right? So just a recap, I'm going to just walk through the slides back to here, right? We use prepared statement to actually secure our database, avoid SQL injection, optimize our queries, and so on. And this is a syntax on how to use prepared statement. Then you can actually use a select keyword to get data from the database, right? And then you can also filter the data you're getting from the database. For example, you want to get based on a particular email, based on a particular ID, you use the where clause to extract only those records that fulfill a specified condition. This is syntax here, and you can actually get to try this out. I'll leave these slides so that you people can actually get to test all of this code, right? You also have the order by clause, which is used to sort, right? You want to sort your data in a particular order, ascending, descending, whatever order you want to use the order by clause. And you have the delete keyword, which is used to delete data from the database. And also note that you can't just delete from the database like that. You should maybe you want to delete a particular record, you use the where clause so that it should tie with maybe a particular email, particular ID, or whatever you want to. But you can also use delete star from a particular database. That means you want to clear everything, right? Rather than doing that, you just drop the table. All right. You also have the update, which is used to update record on or to change the value of record, right, in a database. And the last, you have the limit, which is used to uh, uh, define the amount of rows you want to get from the database. That is it about SQL and PHP. There are really a lot of other things you need to do, but we cannot do everything, right? But the foundation we have right now is a foundation that you can build from and actually get to do a lot of other things, okay? And that is where we are going to end. About what we are going to do next, we'll talk about that. But I was thinking that concerning our task, we might actually have to repeat the same thing that we did on the previous task. But in this case, we are going to use an actual database, right? So I'll actually lay the task and people will actually get to see it, and the slides I'm going to upload it to Drive so that you can get access to. Yes, guys, this is where we end.